Into the Wild, Teaching for Transfer in the Two-Year College, a presentation by Howard Tinberg, Sharon Mitchler, and Sonja Andrus. Let's take a look at the navigation guide to see what we'll be seeing on the hike. As we progress through the video, we'll encounter a few specific areas: the hike, some scenic overlooks, and we'll meet the expedition team. In this video, you'll learn about what TFT curriculum is, how it works for teaching two-year college student writers, and what modifications might be necessary to implement the curriculum with your students, particularly in the two-year college. This will make up the main body of the presentation. The scenic overlooks are breakout opportunities to view an embedded video or an infographic. They'll give you a chance to see what we've learned by researching the implementation of TFT in the two-year college. Finally, we'll meet the expedition team. In the closing moments, we'll present you some final considerations and give you a chance to see who we are and where we teach. So let's get started. Grab your trail mix and your water bottle. Let's prepare to hike, gearing up for TFT in the two-year college. This is an exploration of using TFT, or Teaching for Transfer, curriculum in two-year college writing classes across 3 separate campuses. What is Teaching for Transfer? Teaching for Transfer, or TFT, is a curriculum that prioritizes the explicit transfer of knowledge developed in a writing class to other contexts in which composing is required, drawing upon these key elements: sequenced and scaffolded assignments, explicit embedded reflection, keywords, and the development of the student's theory of writing. You can learn more about TFT by reading Writing About Across Contexts, Transfer, Composition, and Sites of Writing. That's by Kathleen Blake Yancey, Leanne Robertson, and Kara Taxak. Let's get started on our hike. What was it like to dive into TFT? Let's listen.
So the first question I'm going to talk about is why I was involved in TFT. Initially, of course, I was asked to participate in a large research study by some colleagues that I greatly admire and find value in their work. But when I began to investigate what I was being asked to do, I discovered that there was a way forward for my students that I thought had more promise than some of the other pedagogical decisions that I've been using or systems that I've been using in the past. Primarily, my students are not English majors. My students, for the most part, are taking English 101 and English 102, their freshman level courses, as part of other programs. And they are going to be going on to be nurses, they're going to go on to be welders, they're going to do science majors and sociology and psychology and child development, and you name it, we have it on our campus. So their writing is going to be a product of those needs in those disciplines and in their professions. Additionally, many of my students stay in our local area, and it's important for them to be able to communicate and work within genres that we don't necessarily teach at the college, but are incredibly important. Teaching for Transfer provides a way for students to see the nuts and bolts of how writing works in a new situation, so that once they have mastered sort of the key terms and their ideas about how writing actually works for them and how to continuously improve and to evaluate situations, Teaching for Transfer ends up being an incredibly useful and powerful and dynamic form of pedagogy.
As I look back at why I chose to use the Teaching for Transfer curriculum for my English 101 courses, I'd have to say a few factors were at play. One, I was sort of interested in how the curriculum made the 101 experience more coherent. In other words, in my reading about the curriculum, I could see that the assignments were carefully staged. There were sequences of assignments. It all made sense to me. And yeah, I love teaching English 101, but over the years, I've just become accustomed to the idea that English 101 is kind of amorphous, and there's so much freedom and to work with. But on the other hand, it can seem kind of ad hoc at times. So TFT gave the course some real coherence and a kind of organic structure. And of course, I would also say that I saw in the TFT curriculum a chance to get students to become more engaged, to be excited about their work, and I think that's happened to a great degree.
So when I got started with TFT, it was daunting to say the least. I had looked at the book and I had had a small conversation with some of the folks that created the curriculum, but I really had not had extensive research or discussion about the curriculum itself. I was very familiar with the research into reflection and the way that reflection situates learning, and I understood that as a cornerstone of the curriculum. But just getting ready to teach that curriculum for the first time, I looked at the assignment prompts and felt like I wasn't even sure what to do in reaction to those prompts. So I sat down and I wrote what I would be asking my students to write. And I found that that helped me then to sort of reimagine what I would do in class on the day to day, to unlock the prompts for them, to get them where they needed to be in terms of being ready and prepared to discuss the readings. I had taught with very difficult readings before, and I had taught very difficult assignment prompts before, but open admission students require some more finesse in the teaching side of things to get them from their starting point, which can be very different than students in elite admissions programs. And I think I just struggled a little bit initially, not feeling really underwater myself with a curriculum that I hadn't designed and created, and knowing how to move forward from there. Viewing the trail map. Let's know we can finish strong when we get started. Does TFT work for two-year college students? Let's find out. So there are a lot of ways that you can know that something is working or not working in your class. And sometimes you think something's great, and as it turns out, students didn't really find it that useful or hated it. With TFT, even that first semester, I could see that students very early on were understanding things about writing that they hadn't before, that they understood how it worked, how to use what they knew in ways that were really efficient and effective for them. I don't think that that was true of other curricula that I was using. Maybe I was just more aware of what I was looking for than I had been in the past. That's also a possibility, I suppose. But I think, their assignment turnout was stronger than what I had seen in the past. When I ran my assessments at the end of the term, that first semester of doing it, they were actually, even my grades were higher, but the projects themselves scored better against an assessment rubric than the previous terms.
So how do I know this worked for my students? I have a couple quick answers. Well, not so quick, but I have a couple answers. One is they told me that it did. My students are, in general, quite adept at sharing their thoughts. We build a community in the classroom where voicing displeasure or voicing concern or voicing frustration are equally important as voicing those moments when things are going well. So they were telling me all the way through, probably through the first couple of assignments until we got into the last part of the research piece where they're working in multiple genres, taking the information that they know and then turning it into some sort of document or artifact that was going to be used for a specific purpose for 3 different audiences. All of a sudden, things started to click and they got excited. And they got excited in a way that meant I couldn't slow them down. They really grabbed it at that point. When we hit the theory of writing, things slowed down again because it required a level of introspection and reflection that they hadn't really considered before. And depending on their readiness to write that document and do that kind of thinking, they had greater or lesser degrees of success with that. The second reason I know it worked is because these are all students who are in my community. For part of our original research, we did follow-up interviews with a select group of students. So I heard from them how they were using teaching for transfer ideas to approach new writing situations, and they were able to take what they knew and apply it to those new situations in ways that were successful. They were using what they had learned in science labs. They were using what they had learned in history papers. They were using what they had learned in welding write-ups, which I found really fascinating, where you have to converse with a customer in a particular way. And in addition to that, I kept hearing from my students, and I continue to hear from my students, when they are in a writing situation that's new and scary, and they feel like after it's done that they have done what they wanted or what they needed, or they've achieved their goal, I hear back. I had an amazing phone call not too long ago from a student who was very uncertain about writing coming in, a returning student, much older than sort of the traditional aged student, very nervous about being back in a classroom. And one of the things that she did is that she was applying for a position with one of the local volunteer fire departments. And she didn't expect it, but the day that she applied, they handed her a piece of paper and a pen, and they said, please explain to us why you're valuable in our organization. What can you bring? And she said in her conversation with me that she knew that in the past she might have panicked or even just left the interview at that point. But instead, she said, I had the tools to figure out what it was they were asking and what I needed to tell them. And all of the things that we had worked on clicked and worked for her. And so she was able to create that document and leave that interview knowing that she had presented her ideas, and more importantly, that she's hung in there, that she was going to get what she was working for, and that her writing skills and ability had helped her with that.
Which brings me to a last consideration: just how successful was the curriculum, and how do I know it? I know it seems somewhat vague to speak about engagement, but I did detect increased student engagement in the assignments.
On the trail, we'll get to take in the view. Let's start by exploring the elements of TFT, considering some local contexts, and making modifications for success. Sequenced and scaffolded assignments are a big part of TFT, and the way that we wade into and cross the raging waters of a bold new curriculum in the two-year college will be explored. Sequenced and scaffolded assignments in TFT. There are 4 major assignments in the curriculum that build from one to the next and serve as recursive instructional or learning opportunities in which students begin to see more about ideas presented earlier in the course the further into the work they go. The 4 assignments are source-based synthesis article, inquiry-based research project, composition in 3 genres, and theory of writing. Let's take a look at those. So the source-based synthesis article asks students to apply the key terms genre, rhetorical situation, and audience to a selection of readings. The inquiry-based research project, in which students conduct research, is driven by a large research question of their choice rather than a reductive thesis statement. In the composition in 3 genres, students draw from their previous research to compose in 3 new genres for an audience and purpose of their choice. The theory of writing asks students to express a theory of writing that draws from the course's key terms and reflective activity over their work throughout the term. So some considerations when adapting assignments into the two-year college. Most of our students come to their first college course lacking confidence in their writing and reading abilities. They've had little experience writing with sources, and they may have been given few opportunities for reflection and revision prior to coming to us. Some practical modifications. Faculty need to adopt practical modifications, including varied grading schemes, staggered timeliness of submissions, integrated low-stakes writing, and reflective opportunities with plentiful opportunities for commenting and sharing among students. In this scenic overlook, we can take a look at how the scaffolded assignments can be modified and worked with so that we have success in our two-year college classes. The original prompts are there. Those 4 tasks are central to TFT, as are the course key terms. But we may need to include more regular touchpoint reflections throughout the course, guiding the students for how to reflect. The work should be pleasantly difficult. Making difficult tasks more accessible for college students who come in with varied levels of previous achievement is essential. And we must encourage critical thinking by supporting students through those challenging moments. We can plan and share drafts together in feedback loops and in-class opportunities. We can provide low-stakes opportunities so students can work through some of the ideas of the course prior to a large project. We can refine the prompts. We can reduce the requirements to meet the demands of our term. We might adjust for the cognitive load that our students are experiencing. And of course, we want to collaborate with others just as we ask our students to. Talking with other faculty who are using the curriculum in our campus or elsewhere is essential. Some broad-based modifications. Students need explicit modeling and prompts for metacognition, making those connections clear between the weekly reflection activities and the more formal assignments, and providing examples of a theory of writing that draw upon ample illustrations to help them see writing transfer. How do the scaffolded assignments work? Well, students can see the overall structure and scope of the course from the movement among and between the assignments. Each project asks students to do something new while relying on the experiences and knowledge they've brought with them and built at earlier points in the course. But this requires a shift in our teaching mindset. In this infographic overlook, we can compare a teaching with traditional curriculum versus TFT in the two-year college. In TFT curriculum, we must find ways to be flexible and provide varied grading schemes. In the traditional curriculum, we've typically used a fixed grading scheme, and it's worked. For TFT, we have to find ways to provide integrated, low-stakes writing and reflection opportunities throughout the term. In traditional curriculum, we might have been prone to offering only a few low-stakes writing tasks and reflection only after the major assignments. For TFT curriculum to work with our two-year college students, we need to build in staggered deadlines with flexibility on the timeliness of submissions. We may have been used to fixed deadlines and limited flexibility due to peer review, grading timelines, and reporting. But the staggered deadlines and flexibility are essential for TFT to be successful with our students. We also have to find ways to provide extensive sharing and peer commenting on all projects throughout the development process. In the past, with other curriculum, we might have chosen to schedule sharing and peer commenting on a single draft of projects. But due to the ways that students will work their way through the concepts and at different times and points, we just need to be more flexible with TFT. Let's talk about the inquiry-based research project and how we can gauge how students will explore the unknown and work within the assignment framework. There are some practical considerations for the research project. Students have little experience developing primary research on their own, conducting observations, constructing surveys, setting up and engaging in appropriate interviews. So those accustomed to research that is thesis-driven and argumentative will struggle. And that's what students typically have had. But now they're asked to produce projects that start with questions instead of positions. They're looking to expand those questions, not just search for answers. And they have to learn to be curious. This is different for them. In this scenic overlook infographic, we can see how the pre-college experience compares to the TFT college experience with the inquiry-based research project. Before, they were thesis-driven projects that they wrote. Students were asked to write about something they felt passionately about in order to support their position. But now we're asking students to inquire into something they want to learn more about and allow their research question to drive their research. Before, they wrote the big honkin' research paper, that big researched argument. And now we're asking them to discover a genre that's appropriate to the project. And many of them will struggle with this. Before, they simply found a lot of sources in library books and online, and they wrote up that source-based argument. But now we're asking them to conduct a mini-study to create knowledge, and we're asking them to explore how the scholarly articles they might read and the mini-study go together. Some modifications to the research project. We have to find a way to make the path clearer for students. So let's consider, if it's an inquiry-based project, what might we do? We could use some class time to develop and discuss research questions, and use some classroom activities to guide that brainstorming. We can bring in librarians and information specialists to help the students learn to navigate the library site and how to evaluate sources. So how well does the research project work? Let's listen and find out.
I was really excited by the freedom. Interestingly enough, even though there was careful structure in the TFT curriculum, students were given freedom to explore. For example, in the research assignment, which is driven by inquiry, by question, they could choose any question they wanted. Rather than being limited by the teacher. And many students have noted about the inquiry-driven or based research assignment that comes relatively early in the course, how refreshing it was to be able to choose their own topic and therefore to be motivated to try to do research. And when I think back, and as I look back at another assignment, which is a composition of 3 genres, I'm just so pleased to see the amount of creative energy that students express through that assignment. Many students really relish the opportunity to create their videos, to even create infographics, although that's a struggle early on for many of them, to be able to express themselves in new forms and new modalities. It's really quite exciting. So I always look forward to seeing the videos and seeing how creative students can be. And so often in a course, English 101 or other courses in the curriculum and school curriculum, students are not given an opportunity to be creative. And I think this is, a hallmark of the TFT curriculum.
Let's talk about the role of embedded reflection and TFT in our two-year college classrooms. Let's see how we can help students understand how to navigate transfer. So, periodic reflection in low-stakes tasks throughout the term leads directly to the development of the theory of writing task. In this scenic overlook, we can see that the importance of embedded reflection for student learning and transfer really comes in 3 specific areas. It provides tools for contextualizing learning throughout the term through the guided use of and practice with the shared key terms and metacognitive frameworks. It situates writing knowledge, skills, and abilities within the course readings and tasks so students can identify what they know and can do and speak to how they know that. It asks writers to consider other ways of seeing themselves as writers and viewing their own writing projects to identify how they might use their writing knowledge in future contexts. So with all of that in mind, there are some considerations that we have to make. Students have had little experience in developing abstract theories, particularly in writing, having been tasked with acquiring procedural knowledge of writing rather than abstracting from their experiences as writers. Reflection is foreign to them in the ways that we're asking them to engage in it. So, what we learned is that there are basically 3 modifications to consider for embedded reflection. We need to provide sample reflections, particularly the theory of writing. We need to demonstrate to the students how the shorter reflection tasks lead to the final theory of writing. And we need to use class time to write reflectively in guided ways. Let's talk about the importance of reading selections in TFT. And we'll hike through some rough and unfamiliar terrain with our first-year college students. There are some broad considerations to take in about the readings. When you're assigning readings, faculty need to be mindful of the following things. Students do not have experience reading academic articles, and even very limited exposure to nonfiction generally. And students read shorter texts for summary effectively. When assigning readings, faculty need to be mindful of the following things. Students do not have experience reading academic articles, and even limited exposure to nonfiction generally. And students read shorter texts for summary effectively, but struggle with longer works or deeper analysis. Let's take a look at some great reading expectations. On the left, the professor goes through what she believes, and on the right, the student thinks through what's happening in the course. So the professor may think, just because I assign it doesn't mean they read it. But the student is thinking, I'd really like to get to that reading tonight, but I just don't see how I can possibly fit it in. These are simply different ways of seeing the reading and not reading in the class. The professor may think, students really need to see several of these articles that the experts wrote. While the student says, I'm trying to understand this article, but it's way over my head and there's still two more. The professor may say they only need to analyze it in their paper, not be experts. But the student says, I don't even know what she wants me to do with this. The professor may say, I'm not sure what students have read before they get to me, but surely they've seen articles like this in their own research projects before. While the high school student experience was different, so our classroom students are saying, this doesn't look anything like the nonfiction we read in high school. I can't figure out how to summarize it at all. So the importance of reading selections in TFT really is present. The readings provide opportunities for modeling and rhetorical analysis, running the gamut in modality and genre, from academic essays and TED Talks to celebrity profiles and personal memoir. So some practical modifications may be needed. We need to select readings of varied length, modalities, and genres, spending time in class modeling ways of reading difficult works, using annotation tools to assist in deep reading, and introducing complex texts with the appropriate context and tips for how to approach the reading. Essentially, we need four things to happen. We need to be careful and introduce complex texts with the appropriate context and provide tips for how to approach the reading. And we need to spend time in class modeling ways of reading those difficult works. We need to demonstrate how to use annotation tools so that they can get into their deep reading. And we need to be sure that the readings we've selected are varied in their length, modality, and genre. So, what about reading in the course? Let's listen and find out.
I did notice the attention to reading and reading carefully, reading using key terms, and making students more aware of rhetorical considerations as they're reading.
So, we're at the end. We're getting ready to meet the expedition team. These are some opportunities to look back and take it all in. Here are some final thoughts on using TFT in the two-year college writing class.
So of course, anytime you start something new, you get really scared. I was the only person on my campus. Thankfully, I had Sonja and Howard, who are also at community colleges, and we sent messages back and forth. We emailed like daily, often. We shared materials, and we commiserated as we moved through the initial term when we were all teaching for transfer together. That made a huge difference, although it was always a bit of a high wire act. I was never quite sure if I was doing it as well as I needed to, if I really understood the pedagogical implications of the changes that I was making, and most importantly, how to best make that transparent for students. As students started into the TFT pedagogy in my English 101 class, we hit some real hard, rough spots. We hit some places where they were unsure, and I was not adept yet at helping them through those spaces. And I didn't realize the first time through that the struggle through parts of TFT are part of what makes it useful and helpful. It both models and provides practice for how to approach a new writing situation and how to evaluate that situation and how to come up with a response or a reaction or a document in the broadest sense of the word document that would be helpful for our students. So although I was really nervous to start with and very uncertain through the very first term, by the second time I taught using TFT as a pedagogical approach, wow, I found it to be exciting and interesting and provided students coming from a whole range of backgrounds and with a whole range of goals, ways to improve their writing and to become more cognizant of the choices that they were making.
Let's look at our campuses. Bristol Community College is an urban public community college in the Northeast. Centralia College is a rural two-year public community college in the far west. And the University of Cincinnati Blue Ash College is a two-year regional college of a public university in the Midwest. And here's your chance to meet us. Howard Tinberg teaches at Bristol Community College. You can access his faculty profile. Sharon Mitchler teaches at Centralia College, and Sonja Andrus teaches at the University of Cincinnati Blue Ash College. Thanks for joining us on our journey.